In April of 2021, Disney announced that Blue Sky Studios would be shutting down. All projects were seemingly abandoned, including a movie that was set to release only 9 months later. This announcement was really surprising considering that Blue Sky had been working under Disney's reign for 2 years prior to the shutdown. People were initially upset upon hearing this, but I doubt that many people remember they were even gone in the months following the announcement. That is, until news of a 6th Ice Age film dropped. For those who may not know, Ice Age was Blue Sky's flagship series. With 5 major films, it made up over a third of the studio's feature-length output. The first was a smash hit success, becoming the 8th highest grossing film of 2002, which is astounding for a newcomer. It was even a relative success with critics, holding the 3rd highest rating on Rotten Tomatoes for the studio. Naturally, sequels followed, with the returns constantly growing. However, with critical interest declining and the 5th installment underperforming, a 6th was never made. Until early 2022, when it was released to Disney Plus to the shock of many, myself included. Horrifying. I thought we were done with Ice Age, but I guess the closing of its creators wasn't enough to stop Disney's insatiable lust for capital gain. Seriously, I don't know what Disney was thinking here. Ice Age is a franchise that has been dead and buried for a good, long time. I doubt very many people were pleading for a 6th movie in the franchise. I'm pretty sure it was in production before the shutdown, but why even bother trying to finish this one but not the other projects? Like, look at this trailer. They're not even trying. Despite that, it convinced me to give it a watch, but only because I take great pleasure in ranting about movies on the internet. So I guess in some sense the marketing was effective? Regardless, let's discuss the actual film, because it is beyond salvaging. Everything in this movie is fundamentally terrible. First and foremost is the animation. I have not seen a worse looking animated film since 3 months before this came out. Disney really has no standards for animation quality anymore, huh? And now that I've actually seen the movie, I can safely assure you that it is inconceivably awful. I genuinely believe it when I say that Dawn of the Dinosaurs looks a lot better. And yes, I'm aware that this one didn't get a theatrical release and was direct to streaming. I'm okay with a dip in quality for direct to video, but frankly this is absurd. Basically nothing looks properly rendered, characters don't move fluidly, and the backgrounds are much more simplistic. It could be worse, but I fail to conceptualize such a reality. The second thing that will no doubt jump at most viewers is the almost entirely new cast.
Oh no! Those ding-dongs went back to the Lost World!
Oh, and I thought I made bad choices.
Only one voice actor makes their return, that being Simon Pegg. He's most notable for starring in these Edgar Wright films and also being that guy who says, "1/4 portion." In other words, he delivered the most memorable performance in the entire sequel trilogy.
They fly now! They fly now!
He reprises his role in Ice Age as
a fearless weasel named Buck. He was daring, adventurous, and a little eccentric.
His performance isn't as fun as the other times he's appeared, but he's by far the best in the movie. In fact, I'd say he's the only thing that even remotely resembles a real point of positivity for this film. Don't get me wrong, some of the rest of the voice cast has fine performances, and I enjoy seeing new voice actors from time to time, but it's a sharp nosedive in quality compared to previous installments. Very few of the characters sound like themselves, but it's hard to determine how much of that is due to the awful writing. I get that this movie must have been made on an impossibly small budget, but there's no way this was their only list of options. Let's see how much they had to work with. IMDb estimates a budget of $245? Never mind, I understand now. They likely couldn't afford the original voice actors even if they wanted to come back. Simon Pegg probably got paid in Burger King coupons or something. But animation and voice acting are the least of this movie's problems. As I mentioned previously, the writing is purely awful. This goes for everything, but it's particularly noticeable when you examine the returning characters. The original film was built basically entirely on the arcs of 2 of its characters. Manny the Mammoth was a grumpy dude because his wife and kid were brutally murdered. That experience made him resent the world. But over the course of the movie, he softens his edge. It's a pretty standard arc for an animated film, but it's executed very well. In this movie, however, he's back to being an inconceivable jerk. He and his wife are awful to each other, the whole movie, like some terrible Facebook meme. I know they've had a ton of arguments over the course of the franchise, but it's usually resolved quickly, or due to some inherent good in Manny that comes out wrong. In the second movie, it was because he was really bad at expressing his feelings. In later installments, it was because he was protective of his daughter, because, his other kid died. In the other movies, you want to root for Mandy because he's demonstrated over and over that he's a caring person despite his flaws. You want to see him grow. In this movie, though, there's none of that. They easily revert the characters back to where they were 20 years ago because it's the easiest option. They took basically just a template script and filled in Ice Age characters like this is a game of Mad Libs. Manny and Ellie hate each other for no reason, Crash and Eddie want to run away because they don't enjoy their sister looking out for them, and Diego is back to hating everyone that he loyally protected in previous movies. They don't even feel close to themselves. Even Buck wasn't spared. It's revealed that he was part of some superhero ensemble in the past before getting almost all of them killed. This is a retcon of what was previously stated, but that's a minor point. Once again, it's just a way to homogenize what personality this franchise had so they can introduce a new character. They couldn't think of anywhere else to take these characters, so they just pushed them back to the first movie and put them on the same arc, but worse. It's like in The Incredibles. The first movie features the family learning to embrace their powers and personalities. More important than the conflict with the supervillain is the conflict of being a family. That's why the first Incredibles is so good. Each character changes and grows over time, but more importantly, the whole family does too. In fact, it's so well done that Brad Bird couldn't think of a direction to take the characters for a sequel, so he just reverted them back on their arcs and did them over again. Except with The Incredibles, it was one movie they were undoing. With Ice Age, it's 5. These characters have had their progression well documented, and pretending like it didn't happen was an awful idea. Unfortunately, the new characters don't fare any better either. Because this is a direct-to-video animated sequel, the creators couldn't think of anything to do except add a stereotypical girl character. Z exists as your average Disney girl boss that is so preoccupied with being safe and marketable that they forgot to give her a personality. It's not like the Ice Age franchise is some unsoiled monolith of animated storytelling.
Oh, it's a boy!
That's its tail.
It's a girl!
But at least they tried and had actual characters. The second major introduction to this movie is Orson, who is quite possibly the worst thing in this entire series. His personality is that of an evil pubescent Jimmy Neutron who spends too much time on Twitter. He was bullied as a kid for having a gigantic brain, and that made him evil. Typically, a villain backstory like this will tie into the personal conflict of one or more of the main characters. Perhaps one bullied him and is the reason he came to resent the world, but no, the opposite is true. Buck tried to get him to join the World's Worst Avengers ripoff, but he declined. Because of this, the villain is not sympathetic and doesn't cause any interesting obstacles for our characters to overcome. He is simply just some dude who does bad things. He's the main source of conflict for this movie, but he feels like he was an afterthought. He's also completely insufferable.
Ooh, you likey the fire? Oh, you are so naive. This is why I feel sorry for you, Buck. You're too idealistic. In the real world, it's survival of the fittest, or should I say, smartest.
No disrespect to the voice actor, but I cannot stand listening to this character. I assume he was directed to do the most annoying, awful voice possible, and in that regard, he succeeded. The humor is also just awful. Don't get me wrong, the weirdly adult jokes in the originals rarely worked, but here it's so much worse. For example, this is what they think the kids are into. This movie came out in 2022, and it features multiple instances of dabbing. This is the level of out of touch we're dealing with. On top of that, they say,
It's time to get
Buck Wild!
literally 4 times. Even if that joke wasn't stolen from the third movie, it's repeated ad nauseum. In the original, you could read it as Buck thinking it was a really cool catchphrase despite how dumb it sounds, but here there is no potential for irony. They also just ripped iconography from The Lion King, you know, a good Disney-owned movie. The only remotely positive thing I can say about this movie's writing is that it caused me to learn a cool biology fact. Possums are naturally incredibly resistant to venom. That's a really cool fact. I always like it when movies featuring animals include stuff like this. Even if it's just a little bit of trivia, it's still something. Look, I'm trying to be really nice to this movie. I don't want to be unfair, but when you have to resort to this throwaway line being the only thing good I can say about the writing, I think you can understand how painful this movie is. The problems don't stop there, I'm afraid. This movie is less structurally stable than The Continents. The A-plot of this movie surrounds Crash and Eddie, who run away from the herd to find Buck. Upon finding him, they go on an adventure to stop Incel Randall. Along the way, he takes a ride on the
Bone boat!
and we get hit with pointless exposition. Plus, along the way, we are hit with really awkward dialogue that sounds awful.
Now we're gonna have to play a little game called Drop Goes the Weasel. It means Take down Buck! Ah! Oh my... Jeez!
Pretty standard plot. The B plot revolves the Herd trying to reclaim their lost members, arguing literally the entire time. Nothing they say or do affects the A plot in any significant way, it is unbearable to sit through due to the constant bickering, and it doesn't go anywhere. This movie fails on the most basic writing level possible. Typically when you have an A plot and a B plot, they tie into each other in some way. They could be thematically connected, two sides of the same story from different perspectives, or a way to change the tone to avoid burning out your audience. This isn't always the case, but it's a tried and true method. Ice Age has always done this fairly well, with its side story affecting the main plot while offering a much different form of comedy to keep things lively. However, the B plot of this movie decides that it's best to deal with a personal conflict. Pro tip for the writers of this movie: when structuring a plot such as that, it's a good idea to have said plot, lead somewhere, do something, change the characters in a significant way, be important. The best way I can describe the B plot of this movie is if the Canto Bight parts of The Last Jedi were just as useless, but involved nothing but walking and arguing. The Herd eventually reunites with the A plot and fails to do anything important there either. They could have been cut from this film entirely and it genuinely would have been a better experience. Instead, our conflict gets resolved in the most predictable way possible. Throughout the whole franchise, the two possums have made countless playing dead jokes, but this movie bizarrely tries to specifically make sure the two try and reject this part of themselves. Because there is nothing creative about this movie, the two naturally save the day by, you guessed it, playing dead. Wahoo. The message is about being yourself. Wow. Disney clearly does not care whatsoever about the things it owns. It shuts down a studio it bought for no good reason, made the worst entry in a franchise littered with duds, and couldn't even figure out the most basic, fundamental principle that makes an Ice Age movie special. Scrapped. Everything I just complained about is dumb and doesn't matter. Every other Ice Age movie is a 10 out of 10 because it's the greatest character in all of cinema. The real reason I hate this movie is because it doesn't have Scrat or his acorn. What was Disney thinking? Scrat is such a fundamentally important aspect of our culture that we literally named a species of extinct mammal in his honor. That last part is a true fact, by the way. Okay, that's enough discussing this movie. My final rating is a 2 out of 10, but only barely. Do not watch this. There is nothing to gain. I only watched it so I could make fun of it, and it wasn't even worth it for that. If you made it this far, consider subscribing, feel free to share the video, you know the standard YouTuber stuff by now. Also leave a comment saying your favorite of the Ice Ages, and I'll give your comment a heart.